Podcast Industries, Ltd., we have successfully completed a global network consisting of 250 podcasts. The project is named Elwood City Limits. This is a monumental achievement. Hey, right? Elwood City Limits will unite the world. I don't think so. Elwood City Limits is a mere front for a plan to launch a nuclear satellite into space. PBS has dispatched 2 agents to prevent the launch. Will Young, Lucas Mancini. There's some news. Jenna Young. He's still alive. Ha 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 ha. Mike. It's almost ready. My dream will soon come true. Also, Will Young. Arthur Crisis 2. Your project is going down in flames. They'll be here soon.
We're at the point of the show, folks, where, any sort of need to be topical with the intro is out the window. We are just having fun for me and Will. Bravo, Will. Bravo. I did not know you were going to parody the opening of Time Crisis 2.
Yeah,
the Namco light gun classic.
Yeah, you inspired me when you tweeted about it a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, yeah, this is fun. This is like, because I also have very strong memories of the Time Crisis 2 attract screen playing in arcades, and that's you can
especially when you're really young, like when you're like 10 or something. It's like, oh my god, they're gonna nuke the world, and there's this guy Mad Dog. He used to be dead, but now he's alive.
Yeah, no context for anything that's going on. Just like, here is an action movie that you can play with this giant gun that clicks when you fire it. So, which, I mean, I don't know. You can probably, there's got to be like boutique places around where people live that have like old school arcade machines. Like we have one in a local mall that's nearby us.
Well, also at the Propeller Arcade in town, they have a Time Crisis 3 machine.
Oh, now Time Crisis 3 was the one where like it was a little bit different. You could have like grenades and stuff. I feel like.
Yeah, I don't really know Time Crisis. I feel like I see that one around more often because the older those machines are, probably the harder they are to come by.
Oh yeah, I imagine.
But 2 is definitely where my loyalty lies.
I would love to one day get just like one of those peripheral guns, like just around the house.
The gun con?
The gun con, yeah. But yeah, you're right. We don't have as much time left to do these little dalliances that we love to do, because this is Elwood City Limits, the episodic Arthur podcast, and we are in #the end of Arthur. Will Young here with Lucas Mancini, and we are also celebrating a bit of like this is the last milestone before we reach the last episode, and this is episode number 250.
Wow! So this is episode 250, and with every episode this season, it makes you kind of watch these episodes in a new light.
Oh, yeah?
Other seasons of Arthur, and we talked about this a little bit last season, where you have that thought in the back of your head, is this the last time we see these characters, and so on and so forth? And it was definitely happening in this episode where I was like, wow, our old buddy George, this might be our last time spent with George, and it kind of makes you see all of this and gives some gravity to the goings-on that wouldn't be otherwise there.
You're right. And once again, like, even though we only have a little bit of time left, it feels like every time I'm like, well, we'll never see this character again. They managed to show up one more time. So I want to make sure not to say anything too definitive, because even though there is only a little bit of time left, there's still a lot that can happen. And before we get into this second episode of the last season of Arthur, we have a couple of emails. Speaking of little time left, you don't have much time to send us an email. elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. Before, well, we won't be answering emails anymore. So let's make them good ones, hopefully. And we're going to start off with this one from Rohan, a.k.a. Marlo Stanfield. Dear Lucas and Will, it's Rohan, better known as Marlo Stanfield, also known as Louverture from the Discord. Now that it's hashtag end of Arthur, I've been thinking about how long I've been listening to you guys. I started with your second ever episode in August 2016, and just looking back, it's been a long, wild ride. I mean, just look at the world back in 2016. Barry O was still president, Randy Orton's dad. You guys made it through that. DJT, the original, Sleepy Joe, now DJT strikes back again. Heck, you guys started so long ago, most Canadians still liked Justin Trudeau, and now he's stepping down. That's right, Lucas. We are outliving the prime ministership that we started with.
Yeah, wow, that's and just by a hair too. If he decided to draw it out a little bit longer, that might not be the case.
That's true.
Almost the exact same timeline too, right? Did Elwood City Limits start in 2015?
2016.
2016. Okay, so Trudeau started a year before.
All
us.
right. Okay. So
but I was wondering, did we do an episode about the election or anything? That's an interesting fact, though. There's a paradigm shift, if you will, happening here in 2025. Lots of endings, lots of new beginnings. Pretty interesting.
Yes, it seems that we're the harbinger of all of this going on here. Back to the email. Even in my own life, back in 2016, I had graduated college a year before, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I ended up applying to med school, going through 4 years of med school, started residency, finished residency, and now started fellowship, all while listening to you guys every Friday. There's not a lot of things in my life that have been consistent for the last 8 years, but listening to Elwood City Limits was a pillar of my life routine. And you guys have changed so much and gone through so much life. I think you guys were still in the radio college when you started this podcast. Actually, we were working in radio. Will, you only had a girlfriend, then she was your fiance, then your wife, and now you guys have been married the last few years of the podcast. For the last 8 years, I looked forward to Fridays because I knew ECL would be dropping their new episode. It was always one of my joys as I got out of class on a Friday and then later got out of work to put you guys on and listen to your opening 10-minute-long diatribes about movies, wrestling, or some pop culture trend Lucas heard about. I still remember that one April Fool's you guys did a Cyber Chase episode instead of Arthur, and how heated I was that there wasn't a real episode that week. Also, shout out to Lucas. He's the first one who mentioned TikTok back on the pod in 2017, back before it got hot. Once again, very topical here in a way that we didn't expect. Although for
no more TikTok. Now it's all about Red Note. You got to download Red Note, Will.
What is that the same one as oh my gosh, I'm going to mangle the name. The one that starts with Z.
Yes. It's the anglicized name is Red Note, but it is a Chinese app.
I see. And is that right? Zhao Hongshu. And is that
yes.
is that a TikTok? Is that a TikTok?
That, I believe, is a TikTok even more directly made by the Chinese government. And so I think Zoomers are installing it en masse in the United States to kind of spite the U.S. for banning their dopamine app. But it seems to be picking up in popularity with Westerners. Case in point, there's already LeBron James fan cam edits. So that shows me that it's gaining popularity.
Boy, this is going to be an interesting year. I'll miss you guys, and I appreciate the years of content you gave us. Even though it was just through a podcast, it felt like I got to really know you. I appreciated all your political leanings and never being afraid to say how you felt about a global issue. And you guys were always on the good side of anything. Thanks, I guess. Thanks for everything, and good luck in whatever else you guys move on to next, any other venture you decide to pursue, and with your lives. Well, thank you very much. We have one more. It's a short one from Caleb Cote. Hey, Will and Lucas. You guys are almost there. I'm a recent free patron and have loved listening to For the Kids and Elwood City Limits. If Arthur gets rebooted, what would you guys like to see in terms of the direction of the show? I almost want a show where the characters are like 6th to 7th graders, but that probably wouldn't fly on PBS, depending on how it was played, and finally in today's current landscape of media grabbing kids' attention. So an Arthur reboot, we know that there might be a movie on the horizon, but if they were to, I think it's more likely than not that eventually they would reboot it. And I guess the question is if it's the same characters, or if it's the kids of the characters, or if they just age up the characters a little bit more. On PBS, it's like you can't go too old because they're generally for the audience of kids that are Arthur's age. I don't know, Lucas, what do you feel like an Arthur reboot might look like?
It's a tricky hypothetical, because I think there's more examples of it being done wrong than being done right. At some point, it's best to let sleeping dogs lie, and it's like, what I've seen, what they've done with modern Arthur and introduction of characters like Bud and LaDonna, and how Arthur, to me, was this perfect thing, and those elements kind of leave a poor taste in my mouth. Even though, in the grand scheme of all of Arthur, it's still all pretty good. But I don't know if a new reboot, what would be the best way to do it? Some of the examples of reboots being successful would be a show like All Grown Up. I think All Grown Up kind of incorporates the lore of Rugrats, but also takes the characters in interesting new directions in a really smart way. However, there's a bigger age gap, right? There's a bigger difference between a baby and a teenager than, for instance, an 8-year-old and a teenager. We can't have the Arthur kids being in like college or something. And then the other way is to completely rework the show, have the characters stay the same, but have a different style of show. So I'm thinking like Teen Titans Go, a la Teen Titans. That might be a route to go with it, where we have like chibi versions of the Arthur characters, and it's less of a sitcom, maybe a little bit more absurdist for a younger audience. I mean, at this point, again, if for me, I'd rather see that creative energy go into something new.
Yes.
That's always what I'm on the side of. Yeah. We watched that. What was that show called? Hop? What was the new Mark Brown show? That kind of stuff is what excites me. I think that rehashing Arthur, if it's not going to be a feature film, which I actually think would be very exciting, like a huge CGI feature film, or perhaps if they did one of those, like, there's that new, this is a really weird poll, Karome and My Melody show, where it's like all kind of felt stop motion characters, and they recently did that with Pokemon too. There's that Pokemon like resort show.
Pokemon Concierge.
It's all kind of like, yes, exactly. So that's become a new trend.
Yeah.
These kind of really cutesy, kind of stop motion Wallace and Gromit style shows. That's what I would like to see. I think maybe from Arthur, I can really see the felt on Arthur's skin. Arthur looks like he's just kind of fuzzy all over, like his stuffed animals are. I think that would be an interesting direction, at least artistically.
I agree with you, and I think that like something like an Arthur movie would be a nice way for like Arthur viewers of many generations to get to say a proper goodbye as we move past Arthur into maybe putting a bit more weight behind something like Hop, as you said, or just something entirely new from somebody that we wouldn't expect. Eventually at some point I'm just like, please leave it alone, like stop making more of it, I guess. I don't know. I know it's tough for like a franchise, even though we don't think of Arthur as a franchise. So thanks a lot for the emails, elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. Still have a couple of weeks left. We have 2 more episodes after this that you can email it. Well, 2 or 3. So keep the emails coming, and we'll definitely see them. It'll just be the time's running out where we will read them on the air. Really quick note about patreon.com/ElwoodCityLimits. In case you're not aware, it is now free. All of the content, the podcasts and videos, and all the content we've had for years on there is available for free members. So what you have to do, if you're not signed up at all, go to patreon.com/ElwoodCityLimits, sign up as a free member, and you get access to everything. If you are currently signed up as a patron, I would encourage you to please cancel your membership, your paid membership. And when you do that, you can choose to stay on as a free member, and then you get access to everything. If you're a paid member right now, you actually don't have access to any of that stuff, because I'm trying to encourage you to stop paying us through Patreon. If you want to support the podcast, there are links on our social media to my Ko-fi and PayPal. Again, that is just for upkeep of the podcast. You don't have to donate if you don't want to. But yes, free, patreon.com/ElwoodCityLimits. Check out all of our spare podcasts. There's like over 100 hours of stuff. So really, check it out. There's never been a better time to do it. Last time we spoke about season 25 of Arthur, we differed a little bit. I was a little bit like, eh. So moving into this episode, I was kind of bracing myself. But first off, it's a double George episode. Sort of. And we start with making conversation, and this starts in an imagination where George and Wally are breaking into an art gallery. Ultimately, their goal is to steal the diamonds of Ozymandias. And I thought maybe this would be a dream, but it's an imagination because George is actually in his pajamas and he's trying to steal snacks during his parents' party while his mother is encouraging him to talk to guests. And the first thing I wrote besides the summary of this was relatable. Many times as a youngster George's age, I just wanted to steal downstairs while my parents had guests to steal snacks and then go back up to my room.
Yeah, I was, like I said before, in starting this episode and realizing it was a George episode, I was feeling a little melancholy. I was like, wow, this might be the last time we spend significant time with our buddy George and Wally. And I was like, wow, this is like a big part of Arthur. It's a chapter really closing. And so from the jump, I was giving this episode maybe a little extra bit of attention.
Yes, we both are fans of George. I think he's been a very well realized character over the series run, and we get even a little bit more depths about him this time around as we get into the episode here. So George is at the Sugar Bowl with Buster, Arthur, and Francine, and they're all talking about how adults don't know how to talk to kids, and this is George's big thing. In the cold open, Wally had a little aside about how hard it can be to know how to talk to people, especially adults. So in situations where they have to talk to adults, the adults are always bringing up how much they've grown. Buster says, when somebody mentions that, like, oh, I remember when you were in diapers. Buster says, everybody wore diapers. It's what we did. Why do adults bring it up? Great line. And to illustrate this, we have an appearance from the Sugar Bowl owner, who we've seen before, Mr. Menino, who comes over and they make very awkward kind of business customer talk, just like, how you kids doing? Fine. Can I get you anything? No. To illustrate the fact that it's a little bit awkward trying to speak with adults. There's also a thing here where something that George experiences in these situations is that adults pinch his antlers, and they expect that the antlers are spiky, but George lets Buster pinch his antler, and it's actually quite velvety, which I don't know if that's if that's like a moose thing.
I was under the impression that they were like velvet to touch, but I thought, you don't want to touch a moose's antlers. I really, despite where we live, Will, I'm not so up on my moose knowledge. So I don't know how much this is Arthur borrowing from life or the kind of real life moose physiology.
Yeah, I'm not eager to get close enough to find out. So I guess I'll have to take this cartoon's word for it. When George is being driven home by his mom says that they are going to Mrs. Rinaldi's retirement party, who is very close with the family, even though George barely knows her. And George is nervous about this. He's socially awkward. He doesn't really know how to talk to adults. And his mom encourages him to talk to people that he doesn't know without Wally, because George says Wally is better at talking to strangers than he is. So we get a little piece here where George is going to different people to ask them for advice. The first person he goes to is Muffy, who gives him a couple of books, and we get some titles of these books. Speak Up or Die Trying, The Wordiest Words in the World, and the Encyclopedia of Small Talk. I think I could use the Encyclopedia of Small Talk, honestly.
It would be funny if, like, someone replaced these books, like, if you made a meme, and it was, like, the 48 Laws of Power, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
The Secrets.
How to make friends and influence people.
Yeah. So George is not so sure about this, but Muffy's advice to him beyond the books is to basically give compliments. So it's like, I like your dress, I like your shoes, and of course Muffy loves talking about what she wears. So that's her advice. I say this again because every time I see this guy, I'm like, this is the last time. Who knows? Maybe he'll be here in the very last episode. We get one more appearance from Carl, and it's not just an appearance. It's a speaking role here. So Carl, George's friend, suggests that in a conversation, George needs to ask a question and then nod when the answer is being given, and then answer a question when it's asked to him. This is presented as George is asking for advice, and Carl is telling him what he learned in his special education class, because Carl is the autistic character on the show. And so he has essentially figured out how conversations go, but it doesn't feel natural. So, Carl speaks to George, and then he says, "What did you have for breakfast, George?" And I forget what George says, and then Carl's just like, "Neat." And it's very much like the rote kind of conversation. And I thought that was actually a very good-natured, funny joke. Like, I thought that was funny.
Also, apologies if you already touched on this and I just missed it, but do we talk about how George trying to implement Muffy's advice also didn't go well? When he's trying to compliment on that guy's shoes, and he's like, "I like your shoes." He's like, "They got potato all over them." And he goes, "Well, potato is perfect on you." And the guy's just confused. I thought that was another funny joke of George kind of trying to implement this conversational advice from others and it just not going awry.
That's right. He tried it on Mr. Menino. You're right. I actually did forget to write that down. So yeah, like quite good humor so far in this episode. The last person he talks to is Mrs. McGrady. This is where he tries to use Carl's advice. He asks her what she had for breakfast. She said a poached egg, and she asks him what he had for breakfast, and he can't remember. He's just like, "I'm failing already." So Mrs. McGrady, her tip is to ask people about themselves and to be curious about them, which really is the best advice. Beyond the Carl's mechanical breakdown of what a conversation is, it's just like, yeah, that is kind of the secret to how you have conversations with people you don't know or don't know very well. But this is still very anxiety-inducing for George. He has a nightmare that night about, it's actually a little bit more eerie than I was counting on it being, because it's him and his mother, and they're walking through this dark fog, essentially. And he almost gets lost at one point, and Muffy is on a ladder and tries to drop a giant book on him. And eventually he finds his way to the light, and it's actually the entrance to a stage where a spotlight is on him, and he is in front of a microphone, in front of an audience of giants who he is perceiving to be the adults in his life. And this is the internalization of how he feels in terms of these conversations. He wakes with a start. I also really liked how when George kind of wakes up and goes, "Ugh," he has to make Wally do that too. But of course, Wally's the puppet, so he has to just go, "Ugh," with his hand. Arthur once again surprising me with like willing to go to unusual places. I don't know. Like, it's, at first I was like, "Ooh, it looks like Silent Hill," but it was kind of effectively weird in what it was trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it as these sequences are often my favorite elements in Arthur, and I thought that this was a good way of visually manifesting kind of George's anxiety, right? Mm-hmm. So, one, we see him moving away from Wally. Wally kind of being this, for lack of a better term, kind of social training wheels that he's been utilizing and all the interactions up until this point of the show. So it's kind of perhaps a pretty heavy-handed metaphor, but it's effective in seeing him literally run away from Wally to denote that, okay, he doesn't have Wally there. And then we get some great surreal imagery with the giant adults with him on stage, and I feel like this feels very real to like how nightmares work.
Yeah,
I've certainly had nightmares where I have to give a presentation and I don't know what I'm supposed to be giving the presentation on and something like that. And the perspective and drawing of these giant legs, I think it's effectively surreal, and it's kind of a through line in the episode in that kind of later on they make the artistic choice to, until he strikes up a legitimately non-small talk conversation with one of the adults. None of the adults are visible from the head up, kind of Charlie Brown style.
Yes.
Which kind of adds to their intimidating nature for us as a viewer.
Yes, I totally agree. That was something else that I really appreciated about that when we got back to the actual reality, and George is at the party with his mom, and that's the communication of like the separation, so to speak. And yeah, George is basically asked the same things of just like, oh, how much you've grown. I remember you when you were in diapers. And earlier, George says that one of his tactics when he was a kid was to just crawl under a table and make sure the table had a tablecloth so he couldn't be seen. But there is a table. It does not have a tablecloth, so he can't go back to that. George goes to a nearby room. He kind of sits on the couch, and there's an adult that enters who is not named in either of the episodes, but his name is Norman. He's played by an actor named Brian Froud, who's not part of the normal Arthur crew. And he's a similarly awkward adult in that he also says that he doesn't really care for parties. But he and George manage to strike up a natural conversation, and we find out that Norman owns the Gaslight Theater in Elwood City, and he plays the piano for silent movies that he screens. In fact, that's one thing that they talk about is things that they both find funny. So Norman brings up Whiz Bang Dupree, the silent movie star. Keep that name in mind for a little bit later. And George brings up dog park videos. So these have a real life equivalent. These, I don't remember what they're called, but those videos where the dogs, there are like greyhound dogs and they have like human arms. You know, like you've seen these before, I'm sure.
I've seen these videos, and this was just making my head spin. You know, they don't make it easy for us to try and ignore the animal hierarchy. But when George says the phrase, real dog with human hands, it's like, what does that mean in Arthur? You know what I mean? You know, as opposed to the not real dogs without human hands. What's a dog? What's a human? You know, again, it doesn't make for good radio to keep bringing this up and examining this, but they won't let us go into that good night and finish out Arthur without kind of giving me an excuse to talk about one of our favorite subjects every episode, because this was one of the worst examples of the animal hierarchy just kind of making my head spin.
I didn't even think about that.
The other thing is, what was the adult's name again?
Norman. Norman is how...
Norman.
Yeah.
I think Norman was a great kind of realistic, eccentric adult. Mm-hmm. A shy adult. He kind of reminded me of like Steve Buscemi's character in Ghost World or something.
Okay.
Like, I feel like when you meet kind of a shy adult, they always do have sort of these esoteric interests, mm-hmm. and it rang true that this guy would be like super into silent films. I feel like the silent film guys I've met IRL kind of do have this sort of vibe to them. And so I thought it was a clever choice, and I thought the character didn't feel kind of unrealistic. He rang true.
I mean, Lucas, I kind of think of myself as a silent movie guy, so what vibe is that?
You're a silent movie guy? I don't know, Will. I follow you on Letterboxd, and I don't see you logging the Stooges 24/7. I'm talking about guys where when you look at their most watched actor for the year, it's mother effing Larry, Curly, and Moe, okay? Okay. And that, my friend, is not you. You be watching movie with color and sound. I know some silent movie guys, and they're watching 50 Stooges movies, if not more, a year.
All right, maybe I'm like
you gotta get your numbers up.
I'm a fake silent movie boy. There you go. Yeah, you're right. I guess I could be more into it. Anyway,
I don't think you have any opinions either way about, you know, are you pro Shemp or anti Shemp? You know, these guys, that's all they want to talk about.
This is what they end up talking about, so much so that George's mom comes in to collect him and says that they've been at that party for 2 hours. So the time has really passed, and George has managed to find somebody he connects with, and then it wasn't so hard to make conversation. And that's where the story ends. But that's not where George and Norman's story ends. It actually goes right into the next one, which we will get to right after a word from us kids. Now, this barely relates to the episode before it, but I like it, so I'm going to let it slide. This is Anamta and her third grade class. They're all making silent movies, which I wrote down best class assignment ever. I would have loved to make a silent movie when I was in third grade. So they all are in these groups. They're making their own silent movie. They contracted a kid from grade 6 named Seamus to play the piano. So I guess I don't know if he's doing this extracurricular or what. And yeah, they all make their own little silent movies complete with intertitles and piano music and everything. I just thought this was a really neat little idea, and goes in quite well to the next story.
I thought this was great because, you never know what they're going to take from the episode to be the Word From Us Kids theme.
Right.
And it was like, okay, here we go. How to kind of overcome your social anxiety. I'm strapped in. And then it was like, we're making a silent movie. And I was like, yes, let's go. I was like, okay, what? Much more fun, much more of an opportunity for the kids to be creative. And then, to make matters even better, it's a very seamless transition into, I was like, wow, the writers couldn't help themselves. The next story, we're just going to see the silent movie. And this had me levitating out of my chair. Will. This was, what a welcome surprise. We're in the last season of Arthur, and all bets are off. We're talking about, are we going to spend time with this character or that character? How about screw all that? Let's see all of the Arthur characters in a Chaplin pastiche. And I'm like, this is what it's all about. You know what? I'll say I have some big thoughts about this. I'll save it for the end of the episode, but I was excited from the jump.
Well, yeah, and I mean, let's get into it.
And now, back to Arthur.
The second half of the episode is called A Cloudy Day, and the cold open is just setting the table for what is going to be most of this episode. And that's Arthur Reed Studios presents Silent Times. These are the opening credits to a silent movie starring Arthur as Whiz-Bang Dupree, who was mentioned in the previous story as the Charlie Chaplin-esque figure of this. Other characters include Muffy as the heiress, Francine as Polly, George as the boss, and Buster as Buster. So yes, of course, like I say, Whiz-Bang Dupree based on Charlie Chaplin's Tramp character, and this movie Silent Times is based on one of his more famous movies, Modern Times, as is a lot of the gags they get into in the episode itself. Now, nothing revealed here yet about what exactly this episode is about. It really starts after the opening credits here. The Elwood City Tech Expo is today. And Muffy wants to buy a new piece of technology. It's like a VR headset, and it's called Cilantro. She wants to buy it for Bailey. I feel like I'm missing the joke here with Cilantro.
I assume it's like an Oculus Rift or something, or
Yeah, it just feels like the name is
a meta.
Yeah, feels like the name is supposed to be something, but I just couldn't quite grasp it.
Let me look up VR headsets. I was also wondering, and I know I always have to get you to remind me what is the actual release date for this episode? Was it 2023?
This was.
So we're kind of in the throngs of VR being a real thing.
Yeah.
This would the HT.
This would have come out in 2022, but it probably would have been worked on a couple of years before that. So. Yeah. Early 2020s.
The HTC Vive? I don't know. Maybe they were just doing a fake tech name.
Maybe.
Cilantro does kind of sound like a fake tech thing. Mm-hmm. But we had some insightful commentary on kind of tech conferences. This is, again, a weird outside topic for Arthur, of all things, to be tackling. We have Francine being like, is that where you see a bunch of technology that no one can afford? And Muffy explains, it's not just about buying stuff. You can try it all out. It's fun.
It was almost like the Arthur characters talking about E3, which would have been even stranger.
And CES, the Consumer Electronics Expo, just happened in real life. They announced those new graphics cards and all that jazz.
Oh, see, I didn't even realize that. I'm not dialed into it in that way. I can totally miss it. E3 I used to be when it was still around, but yeah. So yeah, Muffy and everybody want to go to this tech expo. On their way there, as it begins to cloud over, the kids see George outside the Gaslight Theater. and it starts to rain, and Muffy's tablet runs out of batteries, so they can't use the map feature to find out where they're going. So they go inside the theater to at least escape the rain, and they are introduced to Norman, who says that the radio told him that the rain is going to be going on all day. He previously said in the last thing, I forgot to make a note about this, George said something about, I think it was about the dog park online videos, and Norman says like, not much into computers. And I'm like, dude, it's like 2022. Like, not at all, but whatever. Anyway,
old guys aren't into computer. Especially like, if a guy watches silent movies and they're not logging 50 of them on Letterboxd, they're like a used bookstore type guy who literally kind of is like a intentional Luddite.
Oh yeah,
perhaps.
Yeah, I mean it's not that ridiculous, but it was also just like nothing at all. Like not even like a flip phone or something you can play Snake on. In the Gaslight Theater, there's some tremendous references to old cinema that I was very much a fan of. So they have posters up for the Great Horse Robbery instead of the Great Train Robbery. And then they just have posters up for like authorized versions for the Lumiere Brothers' A Trip to the Moon, or one of my favorite movies, Metropolis. And I would love to see the Arthur version of Metropolis, let me tell you. Muffy is, of course, the big tech person here, and she's not at all impressed. She says, it's like a museum in here. That wasn't a compliment. While they are escaping from the rain, Norman says that they're just about to play the silent movie that was advertised outside, which is Silent Times, and the silent movies are only 5 cents, and the kids are very excited about that. I did write down, how is this guy making a profit with 5-cent movies? But, like, this has got to be just, like, a thing he does on a day of the week. I'm guessing he has to be doing other, like, boutique screenings and hosting Q&As and stuff like that.
It was melancholy, and that's the word of the week this week, because I was so into this theater. I thought they did such a great job using this theater as a setting and a background and giving it a sense of place with all the parodies and just kind of the way it's decorated in this kind of Art Deco style. But it also broke my heart because we do not have a repertory theater here in Halifax, despite, many other, even in the Maritimes, PEI has a great repertory theater.
Wolfville has one.
Of course, Wolfville has one, but here in Halifax, we don't have one, and it breaks my heart every day. Will, I'm never going to see the Brutalist at this point, because it's not playing anywhere close. I'd have to fly to Toronto to see the Brutalist, so it's going to bum me out a little bit, because I was like, if this place was real, I would spend so much time here. I think stuff like this is great. Whenever I travel to a city, one of the things I look up is, okay, what's the rep theater playing tonight? Because it's just such a treat to be able to watch an old movie on the big screen. And so I thought this was really cool, but it also is just kind of a bummer for me because our rep theater got turned into a rock climbing gym/bar, and that's just a big bummer to me.
I miss the old Oxford. It was even kind of built like this old theater. Yeah, I miss the Oxford, and we don't have the Khyber anymore. We do still have like the place that does like Thrillima. Like they still have those screenings, but yeah, not really a whole theater. I know that I'm Mr. Anti-Theater, but don't get me wrong, I love repertory theaters and removed from the modern experience. Like I think those are definitely important, and I appreciate them, and I loved it being featured here. And as the kids file in, like, the rest of the episode is just them watching the movie. So it's a silent movie with piano accompaniment by Norman, and then there's occasional interjections by the characters. They're usually reading out the intertitles, or they're laughing at what they're seeing on screen. And it's if you've seen something with Charlie Chaplin, like, definitely check out his stuff. The story of it is Whiz Bang Dupree gets a job in order to woo the heiress, and then there's just various physical comedy hijinks along the way with Polly and Buster, and they all end up rich at the end by foiling like a bank robbery. In terms of the matter of the episode, there's not a whole lot to say after that, but I did want to talk about it because I think that you and I probably have a couple of observances and feelings about this. The first thing I wanted to say is that this was kind of brave for them to do, as like,
yes,
like to have more than half of this story taken up by the kids watching a silent movie and eventually having them all being won over by it. Because, and if I can here for a second, it's just like silent movies are so good. And if I feel weird saying this because I feel like a lot of our audience will agree, but I guess that also leads into another point, which is that this genuinely may be the first time that young kids, young Arthur fans, are exposed to the concept of silent film at all, because the Arthur kids are learning about it for the first time too. It's like, it's a movie that doesn't have sound, and there's live music played along with it, and instead of dialogue, it's in the intertitles, and it's all focused on what the characters and actors are doing visually on screen. And I also wrote down is that I wish everybody could have the same revelation that I did when I was in high school and later on when I was taking a film degree, is that old movies are really, really great. And it's hard to say that without sounding old yourself, but until you like watch something from 50, 70, even 100 years ago, like you don't realize how much the best ones transcend time. And this was such a cool thing to do, especially with how limited time is, to just go be like, silent movies are awesome. And I'm like, yeah, Arthur, silent movies are awesome.
Yeah, to anybody doubting us in the Discord or in the audience, watch A Plumbing We Will Go. I guess that's not even silent, it's just old. But so yeah, you would have to look up like the likes of like The Tramp, the Gold Rush,
yeah.
and Modern Times. The General is a particular favorite of mine. But you touched on something, Will, and this is kind of my thought on the whole episode, is that there was a recent interview with Robert Eggers where he was talking about Nosferatu and how there's like a generation of people who know about Nosferatu,
right,
because SpongeBob did a pastiche on it. And this kind of topic came up again when people were talking about, Christopher Nolan is making a movie based off the Odyssey, and people were making fun of people on Twitter who didn't know what the Odyssey was.
Yeah.
And then people were like, you don't even have to be literate to know what the Odyssey is. Arthur did an episode about it. It's really kind of affirming to see this episode coming out so late in the Arthur life cycle, because I was under the impression that this was something that cartoons didn't do as much anymore. And I think that was something that Robert Eggers was saying in his interview, was that, it's important for children's media to kind of touch on these classic elements and introduce children to them, because it's education. Art education is education as well, right? And so whether and Arthur's always been really good at that, introducing us to jazz musicians and architects and celloists that we would not know of otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so it's great to see it keeping up that tradition in its final season. But this kind of stuff is kind of the stuff that gave me a curiosity for art in general. Growing up, I would see all these parodies of movies like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, or Star Wars, Citizen Kane even, and 12 Angry Men. And that's why I watched, being like 14 watching black and white movies, that's why I watched those movies, because I wanted to understand kind of what these cartoons and stuff I grew up with were referencing.
Yeah.
And so this is awesome to keep that tradition going, because if just one kid watches, Gold Rush or Modern Times, they're going to see some really great stuff.
And they're most likely going to really like it. That's always the best thing, is that, I've been doing a lot of movie watching recently to kind of on my Letterboxd. I had a bunch of lists I was filling out. I'm also, knocking movies off my watch list. And sometimes I'll just like watch an older movie, like a really older movie, like from the 30s or the 20s, or a genuine silent movie, and just be like, this is so awesome from like a production standpoint, or it's genuinely entertaining or funny. And you just kind of, I think even someone like me who is, an experienced, let's say, movie watcher, I think this can happen with music or television or books or anything like that. But if you get used to kind of interacting with things that are as old as you are, then you miss out on a lot of stuff that was really, really good before you were born. And this is such a great way to extend the hand to something like this. I'd say the only minor complaints that I have here is, first of all, because it is a silent movie episode, there are long stretches without dialogue and that are very music heavy. And I just hope any kids who are vision impaired didn't feel excluded from this episode in any way. The other thing is that watching the Arthur characters do silent comedies, and like the whole movie are the main Arthur characters in the movie themselves, don't think about it too hard. It's not as effective as watching an actual silent comedy movie, because part of the appeal of those, whether it's Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton or whoever, is seeing them physically achieve the comedic antics and stunts. It's like Lucas, you've mentioned before about the appeal of like Jackie Chan movies, of like just watching him physically pull off the stunts and as well as the comedy and like have it all work. And he was, of course, influenced by the silent movie stars. So watching real people do it is, I think, the biggest attraction to those. Seeing it recreated in a cartoon, even if it was in a style that we both like, I think is only going to be so close to what is actually the appeal of old and silent cinema like this. And of course, the kids end up loving it. And there's, along the way, Norman very much like explicitly addresses like, I have to change the reel because that's something you had to do with these old movies, or I have to play the musical accompaniment because there was no sound to go with it. And then by the end of it, even Muffy herself has forgotten all about the Tech Expo, and they want to stay for the double feature. The next movie up is The Stagecoach Kid. So 5 cents gets you the double feature, and the kids are very, very excited to watch the next one. Completely unexpected in terms of where that episode was going to go. And I think we probably are going to end up on the same side of that one. But let's quickly talk about our feelings about both of these stories with a heavy George focus. The first one about George, making conversation. Lucas, what did you think about it?
I thought that this was actually a pretty great episode. So far, I'm loving this last season. We spent our first episode with Binky. We're now spending an episode with George, and I thought if this is goodbye for George, I thought it was fitting, because it felt like an emphatic kind of change in the character. We had that visual metaphor of him walking away from Wally, and so we see him kind of socializing himself without Wally. And I thought that this was a we don't really see a full arc with the Arthur characters that often. They usually stay static, and it's kind of back to the same anxieties and problems, next week. And so I thought that this is somewhat of a fitting arc for George, kind of seeing him get to this next level of social comfort. And I thought there was a lot of creative decisions with the dream sequence, with how the adults are framed at the party. I just kind of like the party, and I think leading up to those sequences, the advice and George misinterpreting the advice that his friends are giving him is done in a way where, you could see someone being socially awkward being mean-spirited, and it's not that. It's done in a way where it's funny, but it's still, not mean-spirited or anything. So I thought it was a really enjoyable episode.
I agree. I like this episode quite a bit as well. I appreciated that this was another one where it's relatable no matter what age you're at, because of course, like, I have many memories, much like George, of being involved in situations where it's like, I'm a kid and you're an adult, I don't really know how to talk to you, and then whatever, I'll just kind of run off and go do my own thing at a party or whatever, and that's just me. But so I felt this was very relatable in terms of how George feels, but he's obviously more proactive in trying to overcome his fear and getting advice from everybody. I thought that a lot of the advice in this episode is true, and it ended up positively in George making a new friend and finding somebody with interests that spark his own. And George is more and more turning into a more interesting character because now he also likes silent film and all of, along with all the other stuff that he's interested in. I thought Norman was a good addition to this. It's too bad I won't say we'll never see him again, but it's less likely that we will. And yeah, no, there was a lot of funny lines in here, and I really appreciated the way they went about this. Again, not a type of lesson that you would take away from a run-of-the-mill kids show, but Arthur made time for this, and it is something that kids think about. So yeah, I thought this was really good, and then somehow even better was A Cloudy Day. Like it's tough because I think what I like about A Cloudy Day is what it's doing rather than what it is, if that makes sense, because a lot of it is this Arthur silent movie that, as I said before, it just kind of made me want to watch a real silent comedy, like maybe want to watch a Charlie Chaplin movie, because that's the actual like funny, incredible performance there. So the actual episode itself, to watch it, but I have so much goodwill towards it because of what it's trying to do, which again, with so much time left, Arthur's like, hey, you know what's cool? Silent movies. And as I said before, it's like, yeah, it is, Arthur. Tell me more about it. And I just think it's really neat that we had a show, and I'm sure there are other shows doing this as well with all kinds of different things, that is extending the hand out to something that maybe kids are aware of and maybe they're not, but making them aware of a part of our shared culture as humans. And it's like, hey, if you like movies, what about this kind of movie? And making it seem inviting in a way. And I really appreciated that. It really made me feel all warm inside. And yeah, and I was a little bit afraid it was going to take a bit of an anti-technology slant, but I don't think it did. I think it was just more that the old stuff can be just as cool as the new stuff, which, hey, I'm beginning to appreciate, because those teachers in the Word From Us Kids segment looked awfully close to my age this time. So as I become more aware of that, I appreciate stuff like this being done in A Cloudy Day.
Yeah, I loved this episode. I would love to see Arthur. The older the pastiche, the more I'm going to be into it. I think this is a great way to introduce kids to this medium. I wanted to go to this theater in real life,
yes,
and that's pretty powerful. And I liked that it's a very creative episode, because it's the first few minutes or so aren't the silent movie. It's kind of the setup for how they end up seeing it. And then the last three quarters of the episode are the silent movie. But we also get this. You ever see the movie Goodbye Dragon Inn?
No.
Where it's the movie where the whole movie takes place in a movie theater, and it's all these people watching this old Taiwanese wuxia film called Dragon Inn, and it's about all the characters who are in this movie theater. And so we don't just get the silent movie, we get the Arthur characters kind of reacting to the silent movie as well. So I loved this. I thought this was great, and it was just, we always say this, Will, I feel like with these later seasons, when Arthur still surprises us, it just puts a big smile on my face. When we're not just doing kind of an Arthur episode we've seen before, but with Bud and LaDonna added, I get a big smile, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why we did this show for coming up on 7 or 8 years now. It's because there's episodes like this, so I thought it was a lot of fun.
You're right. It really, there's nothing more revitalizing, and you can never count this show out. We've only got 2 episodes left. Who knows how it's going to continue to surprise us? Because aside from the very, very last bit of it, which was unignorable when it came out, we don't know what's coming. And maybe you do, listener. Maybe you do know what's coming, and you're dreading it or anticipating it or whatever. But thank you very much for listening to this episode of Elwood City Limits. That's going to do it for us. Remember, patreon.com/Elwood City Limits. You can sign up as a free member and get access to all of our stuff. Make sure if you were originally a paid member, don't pay us anymore. Make sure to cancel your payment, please, and thank you, so that I can stop stressing about that. We've only got 2 episodes left of this season. And next time, we're going to be talking about Listen Up and Arthur's New Old Vacation. I can't promise that I have a Time Crisis 2 intro in me for the next ones. I just wanted to make sure that I did that while we still have the airtime left. And I mean, hey, we're going to be doing our big thank yous and goodbyes. There'll be a time for that. But 250 episodes of a podcast is not nothing. And I do want to at least say a small thank you to you, the listener, and to you as well, Lucas, for making 250 episodes go by just like that, because we were having so much fun. And we're not going to have too many more beyond that, but a lot of great shows out there, be they television or podcast or whatever, don't get to 250. So I'm very, very grateful that we have been able to.
Oh, and I'm grateful for you too, Will, and of course all you listeners at home. But don't worry, there's going to be lots of time for sentimentality in the next few episodes as we continue on the hashtag End of Arthur.
You better believe it. All right, that's Elwood City Limits for this week. My name's Will Young, and for Lucas Mancini,
I'm a hand puppet. I'm not used to strings.
We'll see you next time.
Oh, I could also go, so, when did you stop growing?